And it's my honor to welcome all of you to the Patrick J. Cunningham Jr. and Susan Ward Class of '80 Endowed Lecture Series in Engineering. This lecture began in November of 2010 with a generous gift from Patrick and Susan. And the objective is to offer engineering students exposure to experts from various engineering fields and educational opportunities outside the classroom. In the past, we've had speaker Peter Rand talk about pixels and interactive digital design games, and Andy Allen, a class of '77, who talked about manned space flight. Andy is an astronaut, former shuttle astronaut. And last year we had Alberto Alaman, who was the Chief Executive Officer for the Panama Canal and Panama Canal Expansion Authority, give an interesting talk on that project. Equally this year we have a very interesting speaker in a completely different domain I think you'll find interesting as well. Because it gives us, part of that reason is it gives us a chance to highlight many of the entrepreneurial programs that we have on campus. We have the Engineering Entrepreneurship Minor, which is a number of students here in our program. It's a great program for our engineering students to understand how to bring a project idea from beginning to end, not only from an engineering perspective, from a business perspective as well. Additionally, we have a number of business students here, and we've had great support from the Center for Innovation, Creativity, and Entrepreneurship in the Villanova Business School, and we're very pleased with that partnership. They've run a number of campus-wide activities, and hopefully a lot of you have participated in those or will continue to participate in some of those. Before I introduce Mr. Nuttall, I want to remind you that if you're interested in asking a question, I please encourage you to do so. You can text your question in to ice@villanova.edu. So this is for our audience that we have a remote audience as well. If you're interested in asking a question, please text it in to ice@villanova.edu. And again, you here as well in the studio audience, we won't do questions with microphones from the audience. We'll ask you to text them in, and then we'll have a moderator ask the questions. So, our speaker, Mike Nuttall, is one of the three founders of well-known design company IDEO. Since 1979, Mike has made a significant impact on the world of design, most notably by strengthening the visual appeal of technological products. His contributions have drawn corporate attention to the use of design as a source of strategic competitive advantage. From '83 to '91, Mike's internationally recognized firm Matrix won more than 20 design awards. Mike then joined forces with David Kelly Design and ID2 to form IDEO. While at IDEO, Mike led development efforts resulting in hundreds of successful computer, consumer, and medical products. Mike is currently a consultant and designer for a number of international companies and startups. His focus has been lately in the area of consumer products using emerging technologies from the internet and new sensor technology. So please, welcome Mike Nuttall.
Good afternoon. Good. Thank you, Dean Gabriel. Thank you, faculty, staff, students, visitors, and I'm scared to think of how many people online somewhere. That's new for me. You know, I've done most of my public speaking as during my tenure as co-founder of IDEO. And that was always easy. I knew exactly what to speak about. Right? I just had to tell the audience what a fabulous company IDEO was, and then hopefully would become clients. So this was a bit of a challenge for me, just wondering what to speak about, because I'd rather actually answer questions. I did think about having just a Q&A session, And then I started having nightmares about no questions. I thought, oh, I should probably have something to say first. But I do encourage you to ask questions. We're tweeting them in or texting them in. At least if we tweet them in, they'll be short. I can't promise that the answers will be. I have been told I ramble sometimes. But hopefully, I'm going to tell you about how I got started in design, what I'm doing now, some of my experiences in between, and you'll learn very quickly that I'm a product guy. I'm a guy that thinks products are very cool and have been designing products my whole career. Hopefully, some of the things I have to say, though, you'll find relevant to the things you're exploring and pursuing, whether it be chemical engineering or other business avenues. Some of you probably have heard about IDEO. IDEO now is 600 people. When I started IDEO, we were maybe 40 people, which seemed to me to be about the right size. We had no intention of growing, and then somehow it's grown to 600 with offices in Chicago, Boston, London, Mumbai, Tokyo, Shanghai, Palo Alto, San Francisco, and probably others by now. And I'll talk a little about IDEO, but I want to start much earlier because I want to start from where most of you are starting right now. And that's, I won't bore you with my early childhood. We're all thankfully beyond that. But I do want to tell you a little about my college experiences. You'll have to forgive me. My screen here responds much slower. Okay. I guess I'm going to miss the first slide. It's okay. This, for some reason, won't go backwards, which will probably save time. I left college, and I didn't know which of two things I wanted to do. So I left high school. I either wanted to go to university and study mathematics, because I was kind of quite good at maths and always enjoyed it, or I wanted to go to art college and be a painter. So, you can imagine my mother was supporting the art college thing, and my father, who was an engineer, definitely wanted me to go and study mathematics. But the right side of my brain won out. I went to art college. I went to Hornsey College of Art in North London. And that was an interesting experience. That's a one-year course where you do a bit of everything. I say I wanted to be a painter, but they gave, when you're at high school, that's all you know, right? You may do a little art at school, which is generally just painting. But there I learned about interior design, jewelry design, industrial design, ceramics, furniture design, fashion design, painting, sculpture. But the most important thing that happened to me was meeting this guy, Bill Moggridge. Bill over the years became the single biggest influence in my career. It's really funny. There are things happening to you now, might be happening today or tomorrow, that you're going to think are just sort of trivial, and then you're going to look back and say, wow, what would have happened if I hadn't, well, I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't met Bill. He was totally instrumental in my career development. Unfortunately, he passed away very recently, but he was probably my best friend for 40, 45 years. So I'll put this in perspective. This was 1967 when I first met Bill. Lyndon B. Johnson was president. The Beatles had just released Sgt. Pepper. Yeah, that shows how old we are, right? Oh, and I know the first ATM, we were in London, the first ATM was installed in a bank in London. I always remember that because Bill was so amused by the fact that the epitome of sort of strength and robustness and security, the London bank would put a big hole in the wall and let people take out money. Bill I met at Hornsey, I can't remember how, and he asked me if I'd help him with model making. Well, now we probably all know what model making is. At that time, I thought, yeah, I knew how to model making was. I was a good model maker. You know, models were these things that came in little shiny boxes and had lots of pieces of plastic and tubes of glue and little pots of paint, and you ended up with an airplane or a car or a truck or something. So Bill picked me up one day. I said, yeah, I'd help him with model making. And he had a truck, and he dropped me off at some building somewhere in London. I'd never been there. And led me into a room with, he gave me two 8-foot by 4-foot pieces of plexiglass, sort of 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch thick or something, and a steel rule and a scribe. But I didn't know it was called a scribe. It was like a steel thing with a point on the end of it, all I knew. And left me alone in this room with a long list of pieces he wanted cutting. You know, 6 pieces, 1/2 inch by 3 inches, 12 pieces, 1/4 inch by 4 inch, etc., etc. Some very big, lots of them, unfortunately, very, very small. And I look around this room, and there's all this machinery that I'd never seen in my life. Thinking, well, this isn't model making. Not the model making I know. And most of the machinery was around the edge, and now you would all recognize it. Things like band saws and punch drills and presses and, you know, stuff. I didn't recognize any of it, but there was one machine right in the middle. So I thought, that must be the one I'm supposed to use. It was a big table saw. So I cut up these thousands of pieces, you know, tiny, tiny pieces with this table saw. So luckily I still have more left. But but the thing about that, which was so interesting, is that I made a real mess of it, and Bill didn't mind. Bill didn't mind one bit. He just, he just fixed it, and I got to work with him. And this was his first design project. He was designing some bathroom equipment for a French company. And it struck me at the time that I'd never seen anyone enjoy their work. You know, I was from Manchester in the north of England. You know, Manchester is a grey city in a grey country, full of pretty great people, and I'd never seen anyone actually enjoy going to work. And so that's what really got me into design, is that Bill loved his work, and he was a designer, so that looked like, cool, I'm going to be a designer, and I'm going to love what I do, and I have every day since. So thanks, Bill. I left Hornsey, and I went to Leicester for my undergraduate, did 3 years at Leicester. I'm going to skip over that completely. I think it was kind of a waste of time. The only good thing about that was that it gave me access into getting into the Royal College of Art in London, which is still to this day probably the finest art and design college in the world. It's post-grad only, and I had a blast there, 3 years. So this was by the time I left, I'd been at college for 7 years, and in England at that time, it was all free. So, 7 years of free education was pretty wonderful. And the thing which was so good about the Royal College of Art, and which is thing you can all, which I'm sure actually you've all already realized, is, forgive me, Dean and faculty, but you won't learn that much from the faculty. You'll learn, no, most of what you'll learn by working with each other. And we were fortunate enough at the Royal College of Art, this building, the building on the right-hand side, the big building obviously is the Royal College. The little building on the right-hand side, they just bought for some development. They never developed it. And 3 of my colleagues at college there and I realized in the top floor there was an empty room. So we kind of took that over for 2 years. It was our design studio. The professors would come and visit. We had our own coffee machine so that we were comfortable, made our particularly the visiting professors comfortable. And we had a design studio. And we did stuff too. So it was just a fabulous time. In fact, the 4 of us are all still designing stuff today, and I think that's because of just the enjoyment we got working with each other on projects. I left there and I went to work with a company called Feather and Partners, a small design consultancy in London, and I worked there for 2 years, mainly, in fact, totally for large companies. And you'll learn that now I don't like working for large companies, but this was for companies like J&J and Reckitt & Coleman, which is the UK equivalent of Procter & Gamble. And I was designing shampoo bottles and window cleaner liquid bottles and dispensers and tissues and all that kind of stuff. And this is a summary of what I did in my first 2 years. And if anyone out there can't see the screen, it is blank. This was, at the time, I wasn't too worried about this. It just seemed, well, that's life, right? That must be the real world. And in fact, it is still today too much of the real world. The large companies, why I encourage people and why I've always loved working with smaller companies, is the large companies do so much stuff that never happens because they're so risk averse. So for example, P&G, if they're designing a new shampoo bottle, they design 20 shampoo bottles. And then they take them to focus groups and they narrow it down to 5 or 6, and then they do test markets, and then they go, oh, no, maybe there's something better out there. Well, there's always a better out there somewhere if you're doing shampoo bottles. So it's endless. It's endless. Now, clearly, civil engineering is probably different. You don't often start a bridge and then just give up halfway through. But on the other hand, you don't get the opportunity to do bridges for small companies, I guess. Anyway, so that really, I think, put me along the path of seeking out relationships with companies that would actually get things done. And that's obviously some big companies fit into that category too, as you'll see. So this was the first thing that I ever designed that actually came to the market after 2 years. So now, add this up. I've been at college for 7 years. I've been designing for 2 years. So 9 years out there, and I finally designed something. But anyway, it made my parents happy. Right? They stopped arguing about whether I should be a mathematician or an artist. And now they could go to the store and buy something and take their friends and say, look, my son designed that. So this air freshener sort of, reunited me with my folks. And I think they bought enough, definitely, to last their lifetimes. And I probably still have some left. Anyway, the one thing about this air freshener, it's just 2 pieces of plastic with some stinky piece of cardboard inside. The one thing that I still like, and why it's probably the only picture I have from that whole sort of part of my career is that it does begin to allude to something that became a sort of hallmark of my attitude towards design, in that it's very simple. And hopefully you'll see on some of the more complex things that I strive for simplicity. Hopefully it's a hallmark of my design work. Anyway, that was for Feather and Partners. So my first lucky break was meeting Bill, and it'll become obvious why, as well as the reason why he got me into design. The second was that after this came to the market, Feather and Partners burned to the ground. The design studio just went up in smoke one day, one evening. Fortunately, no one was there, and I was out of a job. So I started looking around for another job, and I hooked up with Bill, again, Bill Mogridge, and went to work for Mogridge Associates. So there I am in my white suit and green shoes. As you can imagine, those didn't, well, actually the green shoes lasted many years, not the white suit, fortunately. But this was a totally different kind of design world for me. This is the design world I think I realized that I was really comfortable in. It wasn't the design world of shampoo bottles. It was the design world of much higher tech. There's still consumer products or office products, but of a much higher tech genre. And we had a real blast there too. There was only, I think the studio was about 7 people. We were in the heart of London. And that's, I think, where I actually learned to be a designer. You know, so I guess the only lesson that's there, this is, you know, for some of you, the first year at college, and it took me 11 years to be able to, well, 10 at least, to say, hey, I think I can actually design something. So, you know, there's hope for us all. Yeah, that was the whole group. That's me somewhere to the right of Bill. John, yeah, 1, 2, just about all those people are still in the design profession. The girl at the back, Ingelisa, just celebrated 40 years with the company. Well, we call it the company because it all kind of became, you know, if you don't have to have an interview moving from one thing to another thing, you can call it the same thing, right, for the company. So it went by different names and sort of different combinations of people, but it was really one thing. And we did lots of phones. We did other things, but phones. Bill was one of these guys who really liked to start things. He wasn't a great finisher, but he was a good starter. And of course, you need a lot more starters than finishers, so that's a good thing. And he was anxious to start a second office somewhere. And I guess my next lucky break was that somehow of the 7 or 8 of us, I finagled my way into being the guy he'd want to take with him to help start the second office, rather than the guy he would trust to leave behind to run the first office. Maybe I don't look that trustworthy or something. So anyway, that turned out to be, well, let's say it wasn't completely accidental. So we looked around. We had no idea where to go. We looked around at all the other design centers around the world. Germany, of course, companies like Braun. Great design, but unfortunately, I was going to say unfortunately we didn't speak German, but the real unfortunate thing was they didn't speak English. So that ruled out Germany. For the same reason we had to rule out Milano, which was probably the center of the design world back in the mid to late 70s. We had to rule out Tokyo, Japan. So we were left with Australia, New Zealand. That's all kind of, how many companies want designers? Like sheep shearing equipment, I think, is pretty much the only thing that gets designed in Australia, or did at that time. So that narrowed us down to the States. Well, in the States, the centers for design were New York, obviously, and to some extent Chicago. But Bill had a friend who lived in San Francisco, who was a part-time preacher, part-time moneylender. Very interesting guy. So Bill said, you know, let's go to San Francisco. And since then, people have said, wow, Mike, that was very prescient of you and Bill to figure out exactly where to be at just the right time. And of course, it was just pure luck that we ended up at the beginning of the Silicon Valley boom for designers. So we started a new office in Palo Alto. We couldn't get any work for a while. No one, we kind of shopped the portfolio around, and I don't know, no one seemed interested. And then Bill started teaching at Stanford University. And fortunately there, started making contacts with the VC world and with the exciting things that were happening or just about to happen in Silicon Valley. One of the most exciting was the work John Ellenby was doing. So this is totally the difference between the big company that never gets anything done and the startup company. John Ellenby had left Xerox PARC. Xerox PARC was part of Xerox, but it was set up as a sort of incubator, a think tank, and Xerox was in Rochester, so the people setting up Xerox PARC, let's see, I think looked at the map and said, how far away can we get from Rochester? And realized that the West Coast was about as far away as they could get. So that's why Xerox PARC was in California. And Xerox PARC attracted some of the brightest brains around. With the combination of Stanford and Berkeley University and Xerox PARC, there was a real brains trust there. And one of the guys that left Xerox PARC was John Ellenby. So when Bill and I started working with John, it was literally John, a guy called Dave Paulson, who was an electrical engineer, Bill and myself in John's garage, literally his garage, in his back garden, and he had this idea. He had this idea that he wanted to build John had this idea that he wanted to build a computer that would fit in half his briefcase. That was the brief. He reckoned he couldn't spare all his, it was his briefcase too. I mean, this wasn't some platonic briefcase. This was his briefcase. And he said, I can't give up the whole briefcase. I want this half for books and papers, but we'll have this half. Now that might not be the best design brief, but that's how things started happening in the Valley. The computers at that time, the smallest computer of any significance would have fit in a suitcase, maybe a medium-sized suitcase. So this is quite the challenge. And it really was the first in so many ways. It was the first to use an LCD screen. Everything else used kappa ray tubes. It was the first to use bubble memory, which no one uses these days, but it was the very highest tech thing then. It was first used in magnesium case. I think Microsoft on the Surface Pro, right? You know, the new Windows 8 Surface Pro are making a big thing about the material the case is made of. This was made of that in 1982 for the same reasons. It's very, very lightweight. It's actually, I shouldn't use that word. It's difficult to work with. Magnesium, factories that deal with magnesium, they're few in number. There used to be a lot during the Second World War. There were many of them, but most of them go up in flames because, as you know, magnesium powder is just self-ignites. So there's not very many magnesium die casters out there. Anyway, there was a magnesium case. It even integrated telephony into the computer. The one big problem with it, and maybe the only big problem, was $8,000. Right? John had this dream that it would be designed for, well, the other thing, it was designed for executives, therefore maybe you can get away with $8,000. But even then, I mean, what's that in today's money? Probably $30,000. So it was expensive. But in 1982, executives did not type. Like, none of them did. Like, everyone had secretaries and assistants. So you've got to find someone who types who can afford $8,000. So the top right picture there shows the one institution that did find some room for it was NASA. So it was literally the first portable computer to go up into space, and its lightweight magnesium obviously helped. Many of you in your career will come across issues to do with patents. And there's so many horror stories about patents. It's always good to hear a brief, short, good story. This patent, John took out a patent on the position of the hinge. Now, this idea of a clamshell computer is we're all so used to that, it seems like completely normal. But we had models, we were making cardboard models of how you deal with the battery and the screen and the keyboard. We had keyboards that slide out and keyboards that do this, and it, it was a sort of the aha moment when we thought, oh, the screen could do this, and you could close and be protected, blah, blah, blah. So the clamshell design was invented, and there's a patent that covers the hinge. And John actually made more money, a lot more money, from the licensing of that patent than he ever did from the product. Unfortunately, as screens got bigger and bigger, that hinge moved further and further back. And when writing the patent, they'd never dreamed that hinge would actually get to the very back edge. So it had to be somewhere on the top surface. And the back corner didn't count. So that fell apart in the end. Anyway, it was about that same time. See, I had to remind myself how handsome I was. It was about that time that Bill was primarily responsible for Grid, though we shared that, and I was responsible for work we were doing for a company called Convergent Technology. Convergent Technology, we're designing a much smaller computer, something we called WorkSlate. And whereas Ellenby's brief had been half a briefcase, our brief was 8.5 inches by 11 inches by 1 inch, because we thought that was just a nicer size thing to carry around with you. So if you think about that, that's almost like the first tablet, right? Size of a paper, sheet of paper, maximum 1 inch thick. So unfortunately, the CEO of Convergent had rather two things. He had a big mouth and a loud voice, and started telling the world how his tiny computer was going to blow Grid away, because his computer was going to be less than $1,000. And so Bill approached me one day and said, look, Mike, this is absurd. We can't really have one of our clients, you know, it's just uncomfortable to have our two clients kind of at such odds with one another. So, you know, anyone else on the planet that I know would have said, so Mike, I'm sorry, we're going to have to let Convergent, kind of my client, go, which, you know, would have been fair and reasonable, and I would have said, yeah, I see why. But not Bill. Bill took me out for dinner one day, or no, it probably wasn't dinner, probably was a couple of scotches. He loved scotch with his cigarettes. He took me out for a couple of scotches and said, Mike, I got this great idea. Why don't you leave and start your own company? I said, what, Bill? Like, you know, I had no idea about how to start a company. I was like this kid from Manchester. You know, I just loved, you know, was beginning to just get to love designing stuff. But he really left me no choice. It was either, well, start your own company. Well, he basically fired me. He said, you know, you're not staying here. So it was start my own company or go back home. And a few of you have ever been to Manchester, but you wouldn't choose the go back home option if you'd lived for a few years in California. So that's how, you know, people say, how did you get into having your own design business? So I sort of fell into it. I had a couple of weeks. Bill, in his absolutely generous way, said, don't just take Convergent, you know, take the other two clients that you're working with. So on day one, I had 3 clients. I was busier than I possibly could be. I found this space. I quickly, you know, got it fixed up. I hired one guy. In fact, I didn't hire one guy. I'm sorry. Bill not only said, take these 3 clients, he then said, and take this engineer because he's our best guy. So, you know, he set the whole thing up for me, really. And all I had to do was pick a name. I picked the name Matrix. At that time, Matrix was an unusual name. I mean, this is way, way before the movie. But now there's like Matrix this, Matrix that. It was very common. But at that time, it seemed sort of novel and a bit catchy. And it meant an environment in which things develop, which seemed very appropriate for a product development company. So that's what I did. Oh, and this was the Convergent Technology work slate. It was technically an amazing product, another first in many ways, the first surface mount board, in fact, double-sided surface mount board ever on a consumer product. It had built-in communications. It was basically everything was done around the spreadsheet model, but it was pretty powerful. It was $800. Yeah, so what's that? Maybe, you know, $2,500 in today's money. So it was kind of affordable. A big mistake was that they thought it would sell itself. It was so great. Now, and many entrepreneurs I've worked with since make this mistake, that they think their idea is so good that people will just somehow buy it. You know, just like put it out there and people will buy it. So the only advertising they did for this product was they put it on the cover of American Express magazine one Christmas, probably Christmas of '82 or '83, and said, buy it, you'll love it, $800. Of course, no one bought it. So we don't know whether anyone would have loved it, or, you know, a handful of people bought it. And then because this was a sort of a skunk works within Convergent Technology, whose main business was distributed office computing, which they did very well at, they closed it down really before it had a chance. One of the other clients I had at that time was Data Systems Design. They're no longer around, but they were very prominent in the Valley during the 80s. So first thing I'll point out is, have any of you ever seen an 8-inch floppy disk? Have any of you seen a floppy disk? Oh, wow, okay. So you can imagine, you've seen tiny ones. You can imagine what an 8-inch one looks like. You know, it's this size. And that was the latest, newest technology when we designed this. So my role was to take various technologies and sort of put them together in this modular way so you can pick and choose which of these things you wanted. What I wanted to say about this is this was no one in the Valley, oh, I should say a little bit about the design community in the Valley when we joined there in 1980. There was a design community. It was a community based around sort of industrial electronics, you know, and computer stuff that went inside closets. You know, computers originally, office computers were all in what used to be, and probably still are, called wiring closets. So they'd all be hidden away, and it was very kind of messy, and there was some design work being done, but the designers were, let's say, a little dated. So Bill and I arrived there, and we were there. We were the first Europeans, I mean, the first European design group in the Valley for quite some years. So we were just lucky. It wasn't planned that way. And the design community and the companies there had never seen anything like this. It was like shocking to them in a way, this level of austerity in design, where you strip everything away. Now, we're all very familiar with that today because of companies like Apple. If you think of the first Apple iPod, you know, it's really stripped clean of anything that's superficial. That is just classic European design. And the reason it's so different from classic American design, particularly at that time, is, so this is like Design History 101. After the Second World War, basically the profession of industrial design, and I use that term as little as I can because it's such a funny word, industrial design makes it sound like we design factories or stuff. Anyway, the profession of industrial design really came to be after the Second World War. It existed in parts before that, but it became a real profession after the Second World War. After the Second World War in America, there was a huge amount of consumerism. Like, there was a lot of money around. The middle class was born during and after the Second World War in America. The car industry came to fruition in particular. And one thing which was really important in the car industry was to have a new model every year, you know, to create demand and excitement. And that's, you know, that's why all those old American cars have big fins, because you had to have bigger fins, because you couldn't change the engine, right? Most, you know, the engineers amongst you know, you can't redesign a whole engine every year, right? You can't even redesign a transmission every year or any real part of the car. All you can redesign in a year is the tail lamps and the fins and the bumpers and the headlamps, and maybe a couple of the something on the interior. That's all you can do. And that's what the design industry was born on in America. It was styling. It was not, you know, you can imagine the car industry executives say, whatever you do, don't touch the car, don't change the car. You know, just sort of add some stuff around it, make it look different. And that attitude spread throughout American design for a long time. That's where you get this whole era of streamlining products. You get streamlined refrigerators. You know, the only thing streamlining came from cars, and then went into, you know, trains and stuff, and that sort of makes sense in trains. But refrigerators, pencil sharpeners, you know, a pencil sharpener with fins, that's like crazy. Anyway, you take exactly the same period of time in Europe. Europe was still queuing up for food stamps during that era. Like when I was born, I don't think I'm that old, but when I was born, my parents still got food stamps. And you know, there'd be shortages of sugar and eggs and everything. And, you know, there was a lot of distress. And none of that huge consumerism, or at least not for many, many years, and it was much slower in gaining ground. So the design profession in Europe was much more about making things that would last, making things that would endure, making things that were functionally better so that they'd last longer and be more reliable. And there was never this emphasis on styling that was so prominent here. Anyway, so that wasn't just how I designed stuff. That's how Europeans in general learned to design stuff. So that's a long story about a very old box. But anyway, that's how this old box is why it's like it is, and it turned out to be very, very refreshing for the valley. And you know, that whole style, of course, was continued by people like Johnny Ives at Apple. By a strange twist of fate, Grid stayed with Bill for a while, but then came back and worked with me, and we designed just lots of products. I'm going to go through this section very quickly. There was an era, I guess it's like most of the 80s, where I think my small group Matrix, by this time there were maybe 4 or 5 of us, I think we did the industrial design of every pen-based system or you know, tablet-like product that anyone attempted to bring to the market. I have to say they all failed, and we can, you know, sometime go into reasons why. GridPad, this one was done by Jeff Hawkins, who later started Palm. This is the first convertible. You know, the convertibles that can be either either a laptop or a tablet, where the screen twists over. Well, they became popular for a while, maybe 5 years ago, but they were invented back in '85. There was a period here, you might have read the book, I advise you to, by Alan Cooper. It was written more recently than this. I think it's The Inmates Are Running the Asylum, or some really nice catchy name. And lots of people have written books about this problem, but The Inmates Running the Asylum is definitely the best title. And it's about software engineers, and electrical software engineers in particular, his book. But I think it applies to engineers a little too much, a little too generally sometimes. Not all of you, of course, is the drinking your own Kool-Aid problem. The thing that so many companies spend tons of money in the Valley, and still do, is believing that because something is possible, it should be done. So this was a belief in pen-based computing. And Grid pretty much lost their business because of it. Go was done by this guy called Jerry Kaplan, who was also from Xerox PARC. I think he was Xerox PARC. He'd done the Apple Newton, which was, or he did it later, I think, which obviously was a failure too. Anyway, Jerry Kaplan Go, I think, I got a note here, he burnt through 75 million of VC money. Grid burnt through 50 million. Jerry came along, burnt through 75. IDEO, I can't, IDEO was bought by AT&T. They put millions and millions into it and then just folded it. I think we maybe got more. Oh, the big one. Oh no, Momenta, 60 million. They never even built, I don't think they ever shipped a product, right? And it was just this engineering belief in something that wasn't technically that easy, but even if you could have done it, no one wanted. Who wants, like, you know, it's so much nicer to write on a piece of paper, and a hell of a lot cheaper and easier and more convenient. So I estimate that something that 200 to 300 million was blown during the 80s and early 90s on trying to do pen-based computing. By that early 80s, this is what desktop computing looked like. Not particularly elegant. You can see why we didn't have to be great designers to do something which was a little nicer. But this is literally 1983. At that time, so this is just after I started Matrix. I'll give you an idea. In 1982, I started Matrix. This is like the speed of change. 1982, I started Matrix, and when, you know, I'm like thinking, okay, what do I need? What equipment do I need to buy to start a new design company? I need a typewriter. Honestly, I bought a typewriter. It was an electric typewriter and had a, you know, magic erasing ribbon or something. I bought a typewriter. I didn't buy a computer. Like, you know, you couldn't buy a computer for an office. 1982. I bought a typewriter and 2 drawing boards. And every time I hired a new designer, I had to buy a drawing board, and to make them feel really special, I bought an electric eraser. You know, and that was like, you know, that was the coolest thing they could ever dream of, was having an electric eraser on their drawing board. So that kind of dates, puts it in perspective a little. So I took this and did this, which isn't Spark, you know, it's not terribly great or anything, but it was huge at the time. And this one product was probably the most influential in my career, because I became known as, in the Valley and outside of the Valley, in Korea and places too, as like the place to go to for desktop computing. So I designed, this was Wise Computer. They were based in Taiwan. Then Samsung came to me. At that time, this is, you know, Samsung was a manufacturing-centric company who wanted desperately to be something else. In fact, this is a nice little story. The chairman of Samsung, now this is a big Asian company, you know, they manufacture everything, lots and lots of stuff, and the chairman's a very, very powerful guy. And they're very hierarchical, obviously, so whatever the chairman says trickles down fast. The chairman goes into the factory that's making phones, and out of the blue, he makes them take all the phones, the ones that are in manufacturing, the ones that are about to be shipped out, the ones that are packaged up. He takes the whole lot. He gets them to take the whole lot, put a big pile of them outside the factory, and he sets fire to them. Pours gasoline over and sets fire to the whole lot, and says, we're not going to produce junk. Well, he said it in Korean, obviously, but we're not going to produce junk any longer. And that was the beginning of Samsung's turnaround from being a manufacturing company to being a manufacturing-driven company to being a design-driven company. And I started working with them very early on. This was the first product I did. It was very, very successful. Their market share over the years in CRTs, some of you have seen CRTs, you know, just kind of blossomed, went, I think, from 3% to 15% global market share, not only because of design, but you know, to a large degree because of design. I did multiple generations, you know, maybe five generations of products for them over a period of about 8 years. And during that whole time, if I asked anyone at Samsung, what they wanted the company to be. Whether it was you'd ask the chairman or you'd ask the most junior, junior engineer there. They all said exactly the same thing. They said, to beat Sony. That Samsung that's why we're here. That's why the work ethic in Korea is phenomenal, just phenomenal. And that was what drove them to work every day, almost every day of the year, was to beat Sony. And of course, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, they achieved that. There's a company that measures brand value, global brand value, and I think 4 years ago, that global brand value was higher than Sony's. And now, if you ask anyone at Samsung what they want to be, I'm sure you can guess the answer. Right? There's only like one company left that they can beat, and they're giving them a good run for the money. So we will see. This was a product I want to talk a little more about design philosophy. Because I said keep it simple. Sometimes you can't keep it simple because it's a kind of complex thing. This was a machine. There's a lot of stuff happening inside this box, but it was for making presentation slides. In the days when we did these kinds of presentations with a slide projector and 35mm slides, it was trying to answer the problem of how do you get graphics and text beautifully on a piece of 35mm film. And that's what this machine did. Anyway, somewhat irrelevant to what I wanted to tell you about, which is it's just a box, right? It's a box around a lot of electronics and mechanism. But it needs lots of user access points. So it can't be just a square box. It has to have lots of detail. So how do you handle that in a interesting but visually kind of calm way, so it doesn't look too chaotic? So what I do, and I do it in a lot of my work, is I kind of try and think of a big idea. In fact, I'm always, my employees, my colleagues always hear me talk about the big idea when I talk about design. This visual design is like what's the idea that drives the whole thing? If you don't have a big idea, then it's really struggle. Then you end up with confusion. And the big idea here was we'll start with a cube, and it is almost a cube, and we'll just cut parts out of it where you need ventilation or doors or access or slots to put things in, and those cutouts are all V's, right? They're all, you'll see better here, right? They're all V's. So all the detail sort of hangs together. So it still retains some of that simplicity, even though it's actually very complex. Another big idea was, people like try and make things look the same. If you've got a system that's of 3 parts, they'll try and make it look the same. This was like playing with that idea, where we said, okay, let's just rely upon color. So the monitor is kind of smooth and roundish, and the keyboard is very hard-edged and crisp, and you can't really see it in this picture, but the computer modules, of which there's 3 if you buy the whole system, it's a bit like a hi-fi system, has got these sharp chamfered corners all the way around. So there are 3 different things, and they're 3 different colors, right? Well, it's different tones. And then the thing which pulls them together is that the keyboard is made up of the 2 colors, the half the keys of the color of the monitor and the other half the keys of color of the modules, which is a little probably too subtle unless you're a designer, but it is another example of what's the big idea that's going to make this visually coherent. Color plays. Computers used to be always beige, because people were so worried. Manufacturers were so worried about these things fitting together. Okay, you might get a printer from one company and a keyboard from another company, and they'd all have to live in the same office. So let's sort of have a secret pact amongst us all to make everything beige, and then the world will be fine. Everything will look right. And Silicon Graphics, with a little help from us, was probably the first company to really break that down. We did purple computer first. That was very successful. So we did a green one, then we did a blue one, then we did a red one. And then Silicon Graphics went downhill because they hadn't seen that desktop computing was going to completely replace really high-powered big computers. Lots of firsts. This was the first voice-activated phone. Voice-activated phone, 1987. I'll press. Oh, this was our second office. I always thought space. You know, you go in some offices and everyone's like got so little space, they're like crammed together, and there's some value in that. It's good having teams, you know, have small spaces to work in, because you want that intimacy sometimes. But I've always thought, you know, space is so much cheaper than people. You hire people, it's really expensive. But good people, right? You know, all kinds of perks you have to give them. Whereas space is kind of cheap, you know, a couple of bucks a square foot or something. So we had 6,500 square feet when we were only 7 designers. So that's like having 4 designers in this room. So we had plenty of space. That was my office for a while. Unfortunately, I never had time to play pool. So it wasn't all high tech. This is Smith Sports Optics. We're trying to get into the motorcycle goggle world. They were big in the ski goggle world. And so these are motorcycle goggles where we invented this tape, this kind of roll of you know, cling film, basically, that you could wind around so that you always had a clear strip of vision, even in the worst mud. This was a toy guitar. I had the great pleasure of working with Apple in the non-Jobs work time. I actually got to know Steve Jobs quite well, but I'm glad I didn't have to work with him. I'm sure some of you have read the book. But they went through a period, you know, after Jobs and before Jobs, of doing a lot of good work. I think they get a bad rap for a lot of what they did during that period, because they struggled increasing market share. They always kept around about, you know, 4% market share. But they used myself, Matrix, and one other local consultancy, because they had an in-house group, but their in-house group, design group, wanted to do what we typically call blue sky work. You know, they wanted to do crazy ideas and explore new things, and Apple just wanted to get computers out there. So if it was a project that looked like it had a chance of actually getting to the market, then they came to Matrix. So that lasted about 5 years, and was a good opportunity to really kind of work on getting things right. You know, getting the detail just right. Most startup companies, obviously, well, Apple wasn't a startup at that time. Most startup companies, that's the one downside of them. You don't have that opportunity to really focus on getting the details right. And then, so Microsoft was quite large at that time too, and they came to me and asked if I would do a mouse for them. And this was clearly going to be a big program, because it was, you know, they were about to release software where a mouse was kind of essential, and Bill Gates himself called me. So what can you say? So at that time, the state of the art mouse was this one that David Kelly had designed for Apple, which worked functionally really well. But from a visual and aesthetic point of view, it was kind of a disaster. So I focused on just trying to make this thing. I wanted to design something that that when you saw it, you wanted to grab. You know, and it ended up being described often as a bar of soap. We made lots of prototypes. you got to make lots of prototypes, particularly of things which you touch before you get it right. This turned out, however, I knew we had to do a really good job of it, so I brought Bill back in. By that time, he'd been focusing on human factors and interaction design, and I brought David Kelly in because he understood the engineering of it much better than I. And the three of us worked together and created what I still think today is one of our most successful products. I think one of our most I'll skip that. One of our most successful products because it has this feel about it that it looked right. From the very first time we finished it, it looked like it should be like that. So many things that get designed look as though they've been designed. And I don't like, that's not what I strive for. They look as though they were hard work. Like someone struggled over them. And in all your work, if you can try and aim for something which looks like, yeah, of course, and you see the same with bridges. And some of you are probably studying civil engineering. It's instant when you see a bridge. Like some bridges look just perfect. Yeah, of course it's like that. And other bridges look really contrived and kind of distorted and contrived, and as though there were big engineering problems. Which is why the Golden Gate is so fabulous. It doesn't look like it was the solution to a huge engineering problem. It looks like it should be like that. Anyway, this was so successful that by that time my company was about 12 people. I had ran it very much like a boutique design company. It was sort of me and everyone else. That's not politically correct necessarily these days, but it's a great way to run a small design company. It's not a good way to run a big design company. So I was in that position of like, well, how do I grow this? I have to hire some other managers, and that, I didn't like to do that. So the Microsoft project was so successful that it sparked, I think, David Kelly saying, well, hey guys, to Bill and me, why don't we get together and start IDEO? And IDEO started really just because of that one project. So we got together. Fortunately, the Valley was still pouring millions of dollars into the computer business, so we did lots of great projects together. This was probably one of the most successful, Palm 5. This was Jeff Hawkins' company, and he realized, he looked back at all these people that had done slates and pen-based things, and including the Newton, and said the problem with all of those is they're trying to do too many things. They're trying to be an answer to everyone's problems. Let's just focus on the three things that might be important. And they focused just on calendar and contact list and brief notes. And it was unbelievably successful. I think it was by far the most successful consumer electronics product prior to the iPod. He did the same then when he left and went to Handspring. And gradually though, IDEO grew, and it was less and less viable to work with small companies. And we did a lot of work for some not so boring, some really fun. Nike was really fun. This was for the Nike's top athletes, their top running team, where we, just to save weight, we using medical adhesive, we put little magnets here so these glasses could just snap into place with no temples and save a few ounces. Kind of silly, but they liked it. Continued working with Samsung. In fact, this is probably the last thing that I personally designed for Samsung. I think I did this in 2004. A range of LCDs. And by this time, actually, Steelcase bought IDEO, which is little known fact. We didn't exactly keep it a secret. Why did that just do, cable? Okay, we back on? Okay. So yeah, Steelcase bought IDEO, which was great because it gave IDEO access to capital. It's really hard for a design group to have access to capital because you're selling time. You don't never build up any cash. Steelcase at that time had lots of cash, and there was no concern of us being owned by Steelcase because Steelcase only wanted to have us close by because they wanted help in becoming more like IDEO. They had no intention to make IDEO more like Steelcase. So it was a win-win. And we worked with Steelcase a lot. One thing it gave us, one of the reasons we used the capital was to do something that I ran. I called IDEO Ventures, and this was to kind of get back to be able to work with startups, which was very successful for about 4 years, where we had real money, not just our time to invest in as equity, but like about 15 million a year, I think, to invest in startups alongside startups who were our clients, but always alongside other VCs. So we weren't responsible for the valuations. We weren't even really responsible for doing the due diligence, though we did the technical due diligence. And we actually, at the end of 6 years, had better success from that venture fund than the average VC fund. I think that's because we were closer to the companies. Right? The VCs kind of hang out on the edge. They rarely get really involved. We were very involved. This was Jonathan Kaplan's firm we invested in. He did a disposable digital camera first, but then did the flip. Some of you are probably familiar with the flip. He did the brilliant thing of selling it to Cisco in 2009 for $590 million. So a small company, and 14 months or 15 months later, Cisco shut the whole thing down, wrote off the whole 590 million, because what Jonathan had seen coming was, I suspect, was the video, low-end video on your iPhone and smartphones, and Cisco mustn't have seen that coming. So that was a rather fortunate exit. We invested in a company. This is, a long time ago. We invested in this company called Brevo. Many companies end up being way ahead of their time. It's a big danger of entrepreneurial activity, is that the market just isn't ready for what you're doing, so the market fit just isn't there. Brevo had this great idea of using the internet to manage locks, across the world. So if your lock had an access code, they could give and take back that access code from anyone they needed to at any time, 24/7, globally. They're still out there, but it's a struggle for them. So this was the period of the dot-com boom, where pretty much if you had a .com address, you made money, or at least you could raise money. So it was kind of obvious it was going to go poof really soon. And this, I think, was the last thing that we got involved with. This, I think it was, it wasn't SpaceX, but it was some name like that. They were going to put rovers on the moon, and then they would give school kids and adults access to them over the internet, so you could control them. And I don't know what exactly what you're going to do with them, but just wander around the moon and look at things. And of course, they were going to sell advertising, put advertising on the vehicles, and put advertising on the internet. So as you can imagine, boom, and that was the end of the dot-com era. However, it was really, really cool for me because I literally got to hang out, with people who were talking about payloads and what kind of rocket to use, and so an opportunity to hang out with some real rocket scientists for a change. But IDEO continued. IDEO Ventures didn't continue, but IDEO continued. Lots of healthcare, automotive, a few humanitarian projects. In fact, now they do a lot more humanitarian projects. I left IDEO about 7 years ago, so at that time we did very few. But now IDEO has a group called IDEO.org. You should look it up on the web. It's a non-profit, and it uses IDEO people on a yearly cycle who are interested in doing philanthropic kinds of things, and raises some good funds. So it leverages the IDEO brand to raise fund to do interesting humanitarian projects. But most of it's moving away from sort of mainstream product development into branding, in this case. Branding here too, branding the new brand look for Alan Fisher. IDEO's become very strong in various kind of design strategy fields, and not just figuring out. Used to be, I'd say, IDEO's business was about what's the right way to do something, how do you do something right, and it's become more what's the right thing to do. So they've moved up significantly on that strategic ladder of working with companies and institutions to try and understand what's worth doing, not just how to do it. This is working with TCA on trying to make those dreaded checkpoints more efficient. I think this is Bedside.org, helping young people avoid unwanted pregnancies. This is redesigning the check-in experience. I don't have a long time to go into the IDEO process here, but you can all read the books. But more and more IDEO would say it's learning. It's about using the processes and its skills it developed, particularly the processes in the product development world, and bringing those processes to bear on a much broader range of problems. And one of its biggest clients now is the food industry. Okay, I only want to talk for 5 more minutes, so I'm going to pick and choose here. This is pretty much the standard IDEO. IDEO will always draw these 3 circles. They're very important circles, but I don't have the time to go into detail. But people, technology, and business, those early early Valley companies I talked about, they were way too much technology based. IDEO I would say also you should start with the people. What do people want? What do people desire? And then bring into that the technology. What's technologically feasible, and then bring into that the design. What's the design model? Sorry, the business. What's the business model that makes that compelling? And the same three circles really apply to whether it's product development, innovation strategy, or even design thinking. Multidisciplinary teams, I've heard quite a lot of that, about that this morning here. I know you believe in that. I stress that very much. You know, no one can do anything in isolation these days. It takes multiple perspectives. If any of you ever think about you want to get a job with a design company, whether it's IDEO or another, remember this. There are two types of people. Most people are hiring these days. I think there's I people and there's T people. And I people have a lot of depth. Unfortunately, when you put I people, you know, I people are the rocket scientists, right? They know something. They know something so well. They're so clever. They like blow you over with just how clever they are. And unfortunately, you put a bunch of them in a room together on a project team, and this happens. You put a bunch of T-shaped people together, and you know things happen, right? Communication happens because a T-shaped person is someone who has that depth, but also has the breadth of interest of other things. So they can talk about they can talk about the things that the other people are interested in, and start that communication. So big secret, if you want to work for IDEO or any other large innovation or design-centric company, is be a T-shaped person. Right? Have this thing that you really become expert at, but make sure you know don't do that 24 hours a day. Like make sure you have real breadth. Otherwise you won't survive. You do all this. The only problem with this system is I can't go through it without clicking it. Brainstorming. Do you do brainstorming here? I don't believe in brainstorming. I mean, it's fun. It's really fun. You know, put a bunch of people in a room, give them some cookies, some soda, maybe a beer or two, and you know, try and come up with as many wild ideas as you can. That's part of IDEO knows I'm somewhat cynical about parts of that process, and that's one I tend to be cynical about. What I believe in wholeheartedly is prototyping. I don't think you can ever prototype enough. Sometimes engineers think a prototype has to be like an almost finished thing, something that's, you know, that's tight and measured and quantifiable, but it isn't. A prototype can be a cardboard model, a paper model. It could be, you know, it could be something stuck together with hot melt glue. So I encourage you to. Here's a prototype of a, you know, that led eventually to the bottom product. You know, it's essential to go through these kinds of these kind of really crude early prototypes. These were done in 90 minutes, an hour and a half. You know, 3 or 4 people in a room with a bunch of sticks and glue and paper and tubes. To try and envision different ways of putting the pieces together. Here it is in hospital. So that's that. I just ran through the whole process there. I don't think that that's the best way to get good ideas. You know, people always say, "So, Mike, how do you get good ideas? Like, where do your ideas come from?" My ideas come from this. I started running like 20 years ago, and now I don't want you all to go and like become crazy runners. The only one thing I want to encourage you here is do something that allows your right brain to kick in. You know, when you're struggling through problem solving, you know, you have a project, you have a deadline, you have something you're studying, it's all left brain. It's like overwhelms the left brain, and that's your sort of analytical side, and your right brain, which is your more creative side, kind of gets switched off. Your left brain's very, very powerful, and also, which is why you dream. You know, it's why people think they have good ideas whilst they dream. They don't necessarily have good ideas, obviously, but it's their right brain kind of kicking in, because it needs, needs to do that. So this is the way I do it. I go running. I have to run for about 5 miles, 4 or 5 miles before that starts happening, and I encourage you all to find what works for you, to get that right brain to start working. It's essential. So I have more, but I'd rather answer questions, because that way I can talk about what you want me to talk about rather than what I have down here. And we have plenty of time. So let's open it up to questions. Are there any questions? Oh, okay.
All right, thank you very much. We can get a quick round of applause for Mike. And the answer is yes. We've had quite a few questions come in over the text and emails. So my name is Tu Luskery. I'm the director of the Center for Innovation, Creativity, and Entrepreneurship here at Villanova. Really excited to participate in this event with the College of Engineering. Thank you for having ICE be a part of this. Straight into the questions. It's really neat to see some of the questions come in and filter those through, hearing what the students are most interested in knowing about. One of the questions I was going to lead off with, you actually just answered. Where do the big ideas come from? And they come when you're running. So the question I want to lead off with now is actually a two-part question from different students, but pair up nicely together. And that is, what's the best product that you designed, but also what's the favorite product you designed? Are they the same? Are they different?
Wow, best and favorite. I really don't know how to think of best. If you said what's your best design, I would be thinking what's my favorite design. I think the thing I'm most pleased that I did was that Microsoft mouse. And there are multiple reasons for that. One, it was almost ubiquitous. I mean, they sold tens of millions of those things. They were shipped with computer systems that were bought independently, and very few people complained. Microsoft got virtually no returns on mice. So it was a mixture of it worked right, it felt right, it was reliable, it wasn't very expensive, it lasts, they yellowed over time. But other than that, they still work. And aesthetically, it's still quite nice so many years later. There's nothing extraneous about it. Every detail of that, I can tell you why that detail is there.
All right, that's a great one. I had that very mouse, so I do remember it. Related to that, then, what about some products or things that you had thought about at some point in your career, something you thought, wow, we could really develop this, we could create this, but maybe you didn't make? So what's a product out there that you wish was yours, that you were the guy that made this happen?
Yeah. That I wish I'd made, that has happened.
That has happened that you wish was yours.
Oh, wow, the list is almost endless. I think a lot of Apple products, being a product guy, Apple probably almost single-handedly made products cool once again. We went through a long period of time when products just weren't cool. Now they're very cool. So the first iPod, was just an unbelievably great product. I mean, the idea that you could take your whole music library, your whole damn library, in your pocket? I mean, yeah, okay, well, you all take it for granted, but at the time, that was astonishing. You know, it was a true game changer, and as an object, it was, you know, it was very, very desirable.
All right. So a question related to students as they're going out into the workforce, becoming an aspiring engineer or entrepreneur. Aside from being a T-shaped person, one of the philosophies you shared with them, what other things would you recommend? What's the best advice that you would give to a student sort of at that cusp? They're junior or senior, they're getting ready to leave the academic environment and become a successful engineer or entrepreneur.
I'd say, I know this is sometimes financially difficult, but one of the things I'd say is try and find something that really you're attracted to doing. You know, don't sort of rush into doing something just because it pays well. You know, I have to admit that's a temptation, right? And nothing wrong with a job paying well, but there's so few people who really love what they do. You know, you heard me say Bill was like the first. You know, I was I was 19 years old before I saw anyone who loved what they did. And it's such a fabulous thing. You know, I've been blessed by the fact that I love every day. You know, I'm sure there are thousands, tens of thousands of engineers out there who don't love every day, and maybe never love most days. You know, they just, so find something that you really want to participate in, and people you really want to work with.
All right, great. Somewhat related to that then is, since our students are still in academia and still have some time left in their academic careers, what skills and abilities would you recommend that they pick up in their last few semesters here at the university that are going to make them great employees going into design companies or entrepreneurial engineer firms?
I think in any entrepreneurial endeavor or design firm, you need a point of view, you know, about what you're doing. You know, academia isn't strong on point of view. Okay? Academia is strong on sort of neutral, right? On learning many different things and becoming, you know, having some expertise maybe in those things, but you've got to be able to present. People want to know who you are, right? You've got to develop a personality and a point of view around the subject that you're most interested in. And the more it can be your own, the better. Right? Because people will easily spot when you're just sort of adopting someone else's personality or someone else's point of view.
All right, great. Here's a question actually coming in from Rowan University. So you're wondering how many people out there are watching and listening in. Here's a question coming from one of the students over there. How do you avoid becoming married to your ideas? In other words, how do you cope with a failing idea after investing substantial time and money into it?
Yeah, great question. Because you don't. You know? I mean, yeah, obviously in some way you have to, but you know, you can get very disappointed when things don't, you know, when things don't work out particularly, or maybe only when they're for reasons that are out of your control. And in the product development world, and almost any industry these days that you might find yourself in, you're just, you know, you're not in control of many of the factors that are required to be in place for the success of the endeavor. Right? So endeavors will fail all the time. Most of, not most, hopefully, but many of the things that you get involved with will not be successful. So how you cope with that? I'm not sure you ever really cope. You just get on with the next thing, and you hopefully learn from it, and and you try and retain optimism, and move on.
All right, thank you. We'll ask a little light question then, given the heavy side of failing ideas. What Android or iOS? What's your preference there? The iPad, it speaks for itself. All right. Except for technical difficulties. All right.
Except for the connectors. Yeah, I'm the first computer I did buy for Matrix was the very first Mac. I can't remember how small its memory was, but I know it was really tiny. And I stuck with Macs for years, and then I got my arm twisted at IDEO to move over to the PC world, and then as soon as I could, I moved back to Macs. So I'm total Apple guy.
All right. Great. And so back to your time with IDEO, in particular, the types of projects and ideas people were working on, was there a limit to how many people were working on each project and how many ideas each person was working on in that environment? Give us an idea of what that environment was like.
Okay, so IDEO, I think like every other design consultancy, so IDEO is totally project-based. Right? If you ask anyone at IDEO what they do, the only answer they know to that is what they'll tell you about the project they're working on, that week or that month. That's what they do. So everyone is working on a project. Well, all the billable people. There's a lot of obviously non-billable support staff, but all the billable people are working on projects. A typical project might be anything from 1 month to 6 months, with the average probably being around about 3. And the average project team, always multidisciplinary, probably 4 people. And for the period of that project, they are dedicated to that project. They'll have a project space, which is so everyone at IDEO has like their home base, but they also have the team space. Some people would call it war rooms. We call it project rooms. That they spend most of their time in the project room, not at their sort of home desk.
So related to that then, were there particular types of projects that, for philosophical reasons or other challenges, maybe that IDEO wouldn't take on?
Yes, IDEO had, and I believe still has, 2 rules. One, it won't work with jerks, and secondly, it won't work with any military. I think those are the only. I mean, there's a lot of gray areas where there's discussion, but those are the 2 really hard rules: jerks and military.
All right.
Not that they're connected.
All right. So let's take it way back. You're a Manchester boy. Students want to know Manchester United or Manchester City.
Oh, yeah, that always comes up. I think one of these days I'm just going to fake an answer, because I'm embarrassed always to say I only ever saw 1 soccer game in my life, and I lived 1.5 miles from Manchester United's ground. So that one match was Manchester United. So I guess I'm a Manchester United fan, but not exactly a dedicated one. fact, my wife knows a lot more about soccer than I do. I think she supports Chelsea. But, Manchester United.
Okay, Manchester United, Man U. All right. So related to growing up, what did you aspire to be when you were growing up? What did you think your career path was going to look like?
So most engineers and many designers that I know say when they were kids they were tinkerers. I can honestly say I've never tinkered in my life. I don't really understand tinkering. Like, what is that? Why would you take something apart that works perfectly well? Right? Just a struggle to put it back together or to understand how it works. I never got that as a kid. I never built anything that didn't come in a plastic box with a picture of an airplane on the front. So for a long time, I thought I was going to go into mathematics. And then I thought I was going to be a painter. And I tell you, I would have made a really lousy mathematician and an even worse struggling artist. So I'm glad that neither of those, worked. The struggling artist would have been terribly hard for me. But those were my two ambitions.
All right. When you're thinking about products that are you've either read about that are coming online, coming into the marketplace now, or something that could be designed, what's out there that you see as a solution to some of our global problems that could really have a global impact?
Well, that's another one of those really short questions with a really long answer. It's because it's a really tough question. I am disappointed and to the point of depressed sometimes just by how little effort is going into renewable energy. So that's one that personally I feel very strongly about. I mean, it's obvious that if there was a plethora of energy globally, a lot of problems would be a lot easier to solve if there was a plethora of clean energy. And it's purely a matter of investment. And the investment isn't there because of the embedded industry interests, big interest in other industries. So it's rather sort of sickening because the answer is obvious. And whether it's solar or wind or sea or growing weird crops, it's maybe a mixture of all of those. But that could be a total game changer to many of humanitarian problems. Water. I don't know enough about that problem, but it's kind of you got to believe it's not that hard to solve, right? Globally, it rains a hell of a lot, so I don't think we're that thirsty. So there is plenty of water. There's plenty of fresh water. There's plenty of energy to be captured. It's just the stuff that gets in the way is mind-bogglingly difficult to get your head around.
The stuff that gets away, do you mean a technological constraint or other priorities? People are focusing on different issues, different areas?
Yeah, it's largely financial interest.
So here's another question. How hard is it to design a product at the very beginning when the technological constraints are the highest? How do you start designing? How do you overcome those? Especially some of the designs and things that you've developed with IDEO in your past career have been really nice looking. So how do you get over that early technological constraint to design nice products?
So the somewhat flippant answer to that is you ignore them. But it's also some degree the truthful answer is if you get too concerned about the constraints and too concerned about people saying, no, that's impossible, you can't do this because of that, you know, it's really hard to get started. So in those situations, I like to get started, you know, at least by having a vision of what I'd like it to be, because that, whether that's a sketch or a rendering or a prototype, that vision gets other people excited, the people who understand those technical problems better than I do. I need to get them excited about my vision. And I can't do that just by telling them that they're wrong or they've got to think of a different answer. Right? But I can do that if I put that prototype on a table. Right? They'll still say, yeah, you can't do it because of this or that. But at least there's a chance there that the whole team gets excited by a vision. And then, yeah, that vision is going to get compromised as it sort of, you know, goes through the process. But it's the only way. You have to leap ahead of some of those problem issues, and then try and solve them one by one as you go along.
So earlier in the presentation, you mentioned some of the patents that existed with some of the products. In particular, the patent had made a lot of money just from the licensing of that. What do you think about today's patent system and the challenges that exist for particularly individuals trying to secure patents?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because I personally think that today's patent system is totally broken. I'd say it's not quite as broken as the healthcare system, but it's closely running second. You know, so I understand. I get it that if a drug company develops a new drug and they've spent millions and millions of dollars doing that and invested, you know, many, you know, hundreds of man years, maybe, or at least tens of man years, then they deserve protection. And maybe they deserve protection for 17 or 20 years, maybe even for longer, I don't know. Maybe as long as you could have some exceptions to that. But that Apple can sue Samsung over a design patent, which I've seen for literally, I mean, I you know, this was in the press, for literally a rectangle with round corners. Because in a design patent, so if I use this as an example, in a design patent, I can have a view of the back of this. I can say, I'm patenting the look of this. However, ignore this part. Ignore this stuff down here. Ignore this hinge. So basically I can say, ignore all the details. And this is what Apple does. You read their patents. And what you're left with is a rectangle with round corners. Now that's because the patent system is completely broken. There are patents out there, particularly design patents, but many utility patents too, that should never have been granted. And unfortunately, I think that the American, maybe it's global, but the American patent system, you know, the patent office is mainly staffed by young lawyers who go there to gain some experience. Many of them have no experience on the day they start, and they're reviewing patents. And then when they've had 2 or 3 years experience, they go and work for the private sector, where they can obviously make a lot more money. So that's one reason. The second, so there's just no one to judge the quality of the patents really that are being granted. So I would like to see a system where there's a sliding scale of how long patents can last. And I don't know exactly how you judge those, but you know, some get 20 years and some just get a few years. So, you know, most consumer products, you know, maybe you want to get, you know, a year or so, sort of a, you know, head start on your competition, and that's can be enabled by short-term patents. I had one other thing I would say. Anyway, it's broken.
Okay. All right, so the patent system's broken. You're going to fix that. There's global issues that you're going to solve with the environment, renewable energy. All the ideas in your hopper. Can you share one that you're most excited with our group? Last question. What's the things you're most excited about doing next and having happen next?
Okay, well, I had a slide. I didn't show all my slides here. I have some slides of things I'm working on right now, and 4 or 5 startup companies I'm working with. Most of them are working with Kickstarter in one way or another. I love Kickstarter. I'd say Kickstarter is a game changer. The whole Jobs Act, which we could talk about sometime, could be a game changer. So one of the things that's in that category that I really love working with is working with Neil Young. You all know Neil Young? So this is the great thing about being just an individual guy working for himself. I get to work with other, really interesting people. Neil is totally distressed by the quality of music today. Not the quality of the bands or the musicians, but the quality of the digital recording. The fact that most of us in this room listen to MP3s, he finds totally horribly obnoxious. Right? So he wants to fix that problem, and I support him as much as I can. And he wants to make really high quality digital music as available to us all for very little premium as available as regular MP3s are. And in order to do that, he needs a device, because you can't currently do that on your iPhone or your smartphone, whatever. So I'm designing the device, and probably the devices, I think there'll be a whole product line. And they'll be affordable. And he's gradually going, he of course has really good connections with the labels, so he's going through the labels and producing these unbelievably high quality digital tracks.
All right, great. So I'm going to turn it back over to Dean Gabriel.
Thank you. So please, Mike, this is just a small token. Thank you for visiting us.
Thank you so much.
And I think we enjoyed it, learned a lot, and a little bit of history.
Yeah.
I'd like to see some of the old products I remember, but also some of the new ideas that are coming along and the advice you passed on to the students. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure.